It started with a routine dental visit. I had always been terrified of dentists, but Dr. Corwin had a way of making me feel at ease. His office was filled with strange artifacts, an old diving helmet, a taxidermied platypus, and an assortment of rusty tools that looked like they belonged in a Victorian torture chamber. It was an odd collection, but I liked it. It made the place feel less clinical. That particular day, something felt different as soon as I walked in. The receptionist, usually cheerful, was uncharacteristically quiet. Her eyes darted around the room, never quite meeting mine. I shrugged it off, blaming my imagination, and settled into the waiting room's uncomfortable plastic chair. As I flipped through an outdated magazine, the air seemed to thicken. I could feel the weight of the artifacts around me, almost as if they were watching. When Dr. Corwin finally called me back, I was relieved to leave the oppressive silence of the waiting room. In the chair, under the harsh glare of the overhead light, Dr. Corwin began his usual spiel, but his words seemed to blur together, a dissonant hum that mingled with the buzzing of his tools. He leaned in close, too close, and I could smell something metallic on his breath. "Just a routine cleaning," he said, though his eyes told a different story. They were wide, unblinking, and filled with something I couldn't quite place. As he worked, I felt a strange sensation in my mouth, like tiny insects crawling across my gums. I wanted to scream, but my mouth was pried open, and all I could do was make a low, guttural noise. Dr. Corwin didn't seem to notice. When he finally pulled back, I saw what he had been hiding in his gloved hand, a small, wriggling creature, translucent and glowing faintly. He placed it in a jar and sealed it tightly. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I had just seen, but Dr. Corwin was already moving on, talking about flossing habits as if nothing had happened. I stumbled out of the office, dazed and disoriented. The receptionist handed me a lollipop, her smile a little too wide, and I fled into the street, clutching my face. My reflection in a store window showed nothing out of the ordinary, but I could still feel the crawling sensation. That night, I had the strangest dream. I was back in Dr. Corwin's office, but it was transformed. The walls were lined with tanks filled with more of those glowing creatures, and the air was thick with their hum. Dr. Corwin stood at the center, his eyes glowing the same eerie hue. When I woke, my pillow was damp with sweat, and my mouth felt strange, as if something had burrowed deep inside. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Days passed, and the sensation only grew worse. I avoided mirrors, afraid of what I might see. My friends noticed my odd behavior, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I? It sounded insane. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, I felt a sharp pain. Blood filled my mouth, and I spat into the sink, watching in horror as one of the glowing creatures emerged, writhing and squirming. I grabbed a pair of tweezers and pulled it out, dropping it into the sink where it sizzled and dissolved. I knew I had to go back. I had to confront Dr. Corwin and find out what he had done to me. The office was closed, but I broke in, my fear overridden by desperation. The place was dark and silent, the artifacts casting eerie shadows. I found the jar of creatures in his office, each one glowing with that sickly light. I smashed it, watching them writhe and die. And then I saw the files, detailing his experiments. He had been implanting these creatures in his patients, using them to study something beyond my comprehension. I heard a noise behind me and turned to see Dr. Corwin, his eyes glowing in the darkness. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice low and menacing. I ran, but the hallways twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the building. Finally, I burst into a room filled with tanks, each one containing a person, their eyes wide and glowing. They were his patients, transformed into something inhuman. Dr. Corwin was right behind me. I could feel his breath on my neck. But before he could grab me, I found a fire extinguisher and smashed it into his face. He screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman sound, and I ran. I escaped into the night, the glow of the creatures still imprinted on my vision. I don't know what I'll do now. I can't go back, and I can't trust anyone. All I know is that I have to keep running, keep fighting, and hope that one day I can find a way to stop whatever it is that Dr. Corwin has unleashed.